Tatsuki Fujimoto has proven time and time again to be one of the most versatile and innovative mangakas to have made a name for himself in recent times. With Fire Punch, he let his crackhead mind run wild and created for one of the most exciting, unique, and enthralling reads to experience. With Chainsaw Man, he refined his skills and created a still unique, still enthralling, but also a more grounded work for readers to latch onto. He then followed up with Look Back, where he told a very human story clearly inspired by his own journey as an artist, describing all the lows, the regrets, the feelings of pain, loss, agony, but not without its hope. These were experiences that could not be replicated nor found anywhere else. They were stories that had the makings of a great author. From his unorthodox method of storytelling, to his constant subversion of tropes and cliches, to his play upon expectations, the distinct charm found within Fujimoto's works could very easily be felt. This was a man who wanted to share his vision with the world and what he so cherished about the medium of not just manga, but storytelling as a whole. Fujimoto is a mangaka I really respect. He's blown me away with every work of his, and I continuously find myself excited for everything else he has in store. And I think a large part of my intrigue comes from just how much he has grown and how much more potential he has to grow. After all, it's not often you see an author directly challenge the status quo and completely tarnish that image in favor of something more animated and vitalizing. Now, most people who know of Fujimoto also know of Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man, but what they don't know about is what came before. And with Chainsaw Man Part 2 having now been released, I thought it'd be cool to look back on all the one-shots prior to and hopefully shed more light on them. But to preface, this video is inspired by Kyle Robes' Heart of Chainsaw Man video, and if you ever get the time, do check him out, because he puts out some high quality stuff. Also, while I usually try to keep my videos relatively spoiler free, this is not that type of video. So my best recommendation would be to go into this having already finished all of these works shown on screen, but if you're too lazy, then don't be too lazy. It honestly isn't that big of a commitment, and you can blitz through them pretty damn quick. So I repeat, read the one-shots, come back, and no more stalling. There Were Two Chickens in the Garden takes place in post-conquered Earth, where aliens have taken over and now live just as humans once did. They go to school, they have jobs, and they function as people you'd see in your everyday lives. But where the twist lies is there are, in fact, two chickens in this garden. What does that mean? Well, these two chickens are actually humans in disguise, and because the aliens are sped, the humans survive by playing pretend as pets for the alien masses. And what follows is a story of the two sides eventually colliding and the consequences that come from it. It's not particularly special in concept, but from premise alone, Fujimoto's distinct touch can be recognized. Similar to Chainsaw Man, this one-shot takes an already established idea, in this case a post-apocalyptic world, and adds a spice to enrich the experience. Aliens have taken over, but the world isn't a barren wasteland. It's one readers are already accustomed to. There's this sense of familiarity as well as curiosity. The world's much like ours, but what exactly makes it different? How does society function here in comparison to our own? And what these questions do is they add to the story's intrigue. Now, are they actually answered within the contents of the one-shot? No, at least not extensively. But I think the fact that these questions naturally come up is something worth noting, because every work I plan to discuss and every work Fujimoto has made has for the most part a setup and a twist. Here, the world ruled by aliens is a setup, and the twist is a supposed unchanged society as well as the existence of the two chickens. The questions that arise as a byproduct of that is what layers the story with an element of mystery. And by extension, it's the twists that create for the one-of-a-kind experiences Fujimoto ends up creating. But beyond that, it's Fujimoto's focus that gives his stories staying power. Having read all of his one-shots and serializations, I've come to realize there's one unifying trait that ties them all together. Fujimoto likes to write stories that are different. He's someone who'll use any means necessary if he thinks it'll service the story in a good way. Even if a character has to die or the narrative has to be taken to a compromising direction, so long as it makes for greater impact, Fujimoto will do it. Which, don't get me wrong, isn't an approach exclusive to him, but an approach that breeds unpredictability. And the more unpredictable something is, the more enticing it potentially can be. Yet despite all the bizarre, outlandish, and unconventional ideas Fujimoto comes up with, at the core of it all, his real focus lies in somewhere more grounded, more human. The struggle of a man who wanted to die but was told to live. The desire of a boy who wanted to be loved but was stripped away of everything once he was. The innocent and naive passion of two girls pursuing their dreams, and the soul-crushing reality of losing someone dear in the process. These are stories despite the plethora of insane shit that takes place that revolve around human characters dealing with human problems. Amongst the chaos, amongst the highs and the lows, the heart of Fujimoto's works have something that's innately human. And looking at his first one-shot, the seeds to his appeal are scattered all throughout. But similar to what I said regarding his approach, his writing of human stories isn't unique to just himself. You can find many well-known authors who've tackled said ideas in great effect, but every author has an allure that makes their stories their own. And in Fujimoto's case, it's his ability to balance between crafting the most out there, over-the-top scenarios possible and displaying the most real, raw, and unfiltered showcase of human emotion. There Were Two Chickens in the Garden is Fujimoto's first official attempt at delivering in such a manner. He takes these two and dedicates a brief span of pages to get readers to understand their position. Ever since the war, humanity has slowly whittled out. From the aliens' point of view, humans are just another food source. And so Yuta and Ami have been getting by living off the scraps they're fed. The situation is dire and the future seems bleak, but the two still have each other. They're hopeful that maybe one day things will be different, even if that hope is unfounded. But of course there's a conflict. Their real identities are very quickly exposed, and the eventual outcome of that clash leaves them backed into a corner. And that's when Fujimoto reveals his final hand, an added layer of unpredictability, one last twist. Yuto, the boy who played an older brother-esque role for Ami, was this entire time an alien, the same alien who massacred Ami's loved ones. Back then, Yuto viewed humans the same way the rest of his kind did, as food. But on a whim, just as he played pretend as a chicken, he also played pretend as a human being, and through it, he realized something. That he cared. He wanted to protect this little girl who didn't have anyone else left to rely on, and in one final confrontation, he lies by telling her he never cared, that he planned to eat her down the line from the start. But through this lie, she survives. It's not exactly a happy ending, but what this one-shot tries to do is pretty explicit in nature. It's a bittersweet finish with twists and turns along the way. Humanity still lives in fear, and the two are separated, but the tale lives on. That time when an alien learned to love, and when there were, in fact, two chickens in the garden. Up next is Sasaki-Kun Has Stopped the Bullets. This one isn't as unpredictable as the last, but the message it conveys and how it's conveyed is surprisingly uplifting. Essentially, as the title suggests, Sasaki-Kun quite literally stops a bullet with his bare hands. How it happens is this man pulls up to school with a gun, shoots, and then Sasaki saves the day. By itself, this feat from a reader's perspective is cool, but not something that holds a significant amount of weight. Sure, it's surprising, but this is manga, and high schoolers having freakish supernatural abilities is commonplace, which is exactly why I find Fujimoto's take regarding this moment as fascinating as I do. He tackles the shonen trope of believing in yourself from a more human perspective, a place of relatability. Sasuke's dream is to become an astronaut. That's what his father once was. But unfortunately, without ever reaching the moon, his father passed. And ever since, Sasuke has held on to the belief he'll one day meet his father again once he himself goes to the moon. It's a belief that sounds like pure fantasy, but it's a fantasy Sasuke wholeheartedly stands by because that's what his father had told him. Regardless of the ridicule that comes his way, so long as the probability of his father still being there wasn't zero, there was still a chance. In the same way his teacher claiming to be God was likely false, it wasn't absolute. His teacher could be God, he could become an astronaut, his father could be waiting up in the stars, and in this moment, Sasuke could stop the bullets. All that mattered was for him to believe. That message, I think, is one a lot of people might resonate with, one that might strike a chord. Even more so because it originates from the simple desire to see your loved ones once more. This isn't a case of a shonen protagonist using the power of friendship to stand on top, but instead a normal human being trying to do the impossible. Does believing in yourself always lead to success? Probably not. Does it apply to every situation? No. Is it a little too optimistic? Yeah. But the idea of anything being possible so long as you try is inspiring. No one can say with 100% certainty if something will happen. Your dreams may come true, it may not, but giving up without ever taking the first step is the same as losing at the starting line. Sasaki-Kun has stopped the bullet, and that means he made the impossible possible. It's not a matter of what he did or how he did it, but how he made an improbability reality. He proved to everyone that anything can come true and the future is malleable. It's not predetermined and can be what one wants it to be, depending on the life they live and the mindset they hold. In other words, people have personal agency. It's within their power to determine the lives they lead. And I think that's a message that deserves to be heard. Love is Blind is the third one-shot we're going to be tackling, and it is bizarre. There's no profound message like the last or any plot twist like the first, but it's a fun, sweet, and wholesome read surrounding a high school romance. It's about this boy hellbent on confessing to a girl he likes named Yuri. There's a lot of awkward tension between them, but you can tell the feelings are mutual. Unfortunately though, with every attempt he gets, something comes up. First it's his teachers, then it's him pussying out, afterwards it's a street thug, and finally it's an alien from space sent to destroy planet Earth. So yeah, there's a pretty drastic change from this to this. But it's the absolute absurdity of all these events that create this eccentric and comedic charm you can't help but gleefully smile at. A lot of the interactions are over-exaggerated and the story jumps from one place to the next, but with a little bit of finesse, Fujimoto is able to deliver on a super enjoyable one-shot that's continuously throwing your emotions in array. The Prez has his priorities in check. Today is the day he's gonna confess, and nothing is going to stop him, including the spooky spaceman. And so he brushes every obstacle in his way and does what he'd set out to do from the start. He confesses, and naturally, Yuri reciprocates. Afterwards, the thug gives them money to congratulate, the alien decides to not destroy the planet because the mood wasn't right, and the couple become official. It's an incredibly silly, fairy tale-esque story about a boy pouring his heart out, followed by an endearing end of the two finally being honest with one another, which all in all makes for a simple, cute, and funny story about love being blind. Shikaku is fourth on the list, and what I want to highlight here is Fujimoto's ability to humanize characters, and more specifically how he humanizes them in a very short period of time. This is something that could be hit or miss, but for me, more often than not, Fujimoto succeeds. The way I see it, I don't need entire chapters or arcs dedicated to specific characters to care. Instead, it's more so about execution, how well an author can convey a character's struggles, dreams, aspirations, and so on and so forth. Basically, if there's something there to latch onto, and if that something impacts me, that's enough. And this just so happens to be the case with most of Fujimoto's works, including Shikaku. Shikaku is a hitman, and she's been tasked to kill Yusel, an immortal vampire. A weird combination, but nonetheless an interesting one. Shikaku is an innocent and naive girl, but also incredibly airheaded, to the point where she can present a collection of gouged eyes with a smile. Which sounds both contradictory and terrifying, but given how she's portrayed and her overall attitude, fear isn't the exact emotion you feel. Instead, it's intrigue. Who is Shikaku really? What kind of life does she live? How does she view the world? On the same end, Yusel is an immortal, meaning he can't die. So why does he want to? What kind of life has he lived to make him desire death? Well, by his own words, he's already seen it all, and now his existence feels hollow and purposeless. But beyond that, he lacks companionship, a friend, a partner, and that simple struggle of loneliness humanizes him. Likewise, Shikaku is extremely oblivious and has very little social awareness. She's the type of kid who used to tear up bugs for fun and naturally was hated for it. But despite her strange tendencies, her intentions were never bad. If anything, she wanted to do what was expected but was never sure how to go about it, and that inability of her destroyed her relationships. Like Yusel, she was alone. But as they build a connection and fill the void in each other's hearts, there's this sense of payoff. Yusel was the first person to forgive Shikaku, and Shikaku was the first to ever make him laugh. But when it comes to Fujimoto, there's always a twist, a moment of surprise. Whether that surprise is one that'll shatter your soul or heal your heart is beyond unpredictable. But in Shikaku's case, it's a mixture of both. Ever since interacting with Yusel, Shikaku's felt a pain in her heart, and we soon come to find out that pain was the love she felt from being accepted for the first time. But unfortunately, due to her circumstances, this happens. It's a scene of tragedy. The two who've always longed for someone to share their troubles with and to consider an equal lose each other the very moment they finally connect. But surprisingly, the one-shot then pulls a complete 180 and ends in a rather wholesome note. By turning Shikaku into a vampire, she lives to see another day. And quickly after, we're shown a brief epilogue of Yusel and her living happily 200 years into the future. It's a lighthearted closing to a story that otherwise could have taken a much darker route, kind of reminiscent of the final 2 chapters of Chainsaw Man, although to a lesser effect. Now, to clarify, Shikaku is by no means Fujimoto's best example of him humanizing characters. In fact, while I stand by my praise, this is one of his weaker attempts compared to his future works. But when you compare and contrast everything he's written, there's this real sense of growth, and you can see just how much Fujimoto has improved and how much more capable he's become. From experiencing his first works to experiencing what they eventually blossom into, you come to appreciate Fujimoto even more. In the past, he was still developing as both an artist and a writer. But now he's given birth to characters like Denji, Makima, and Aki, all of which being fully realized through brief but impactful moments of introspection. And it's these brief moments that end up being some of the most memorable. I think more than anything, why I like Fujimoto so much is 1, how enjoyable and unpredictable his stories are, and 2, how despite all the chaos, the themes and ideas he tackles have this emotional heart that really resonate with me. Shikaku and every work I've discussed thus far is a small glimpse into that, but nonetheless they all have a distinct charm, each offering a new and exciting experience from the last. Which brings us to Siren Rhapsody. Siren Rhapsody is one of Fujimoto's most surprising works, not because of its unconventional nature, but because of its conventional nature. Meaning, it's not something you normally see or even expect based on Fujimoto's history, but strangely enough, this doesn't take away from what Siren Rhapsody does and how it goes about it. This is another story centered around love. There's this boy named Toshihide and a girl named Shiu, who's also a mermaid. As expected, the two fall in love, and y'all know the rest. But what's worth noting here is Siren Rhapsody's exploration of romance through Toshihide falling for a supposed monster and the fears that come from that. Mermaids eat humans, not out of desire, but out of instinct. It's within their blood to feast when the opportunity presents itself. Almost like a switch, they lose control and transform into carnal, primal versions of their usual selves. So when Toshihide encounters this firsthand, he naturally becomes afraid. The girl he fell for in this split second wasn't the girl he knew. She was a monster, and that scared him, and so he ran away. But through talking with his dad, Toshihide has a change in perspective. Like him, his father had also fallen for a mermaid, but despite the consequences, went on to marry her. His father was also scared. His father also held his grievances, but in the end, his father valued her smile above all else. And hearing that, Toshihide realized he felt the same way. Monster or not, he wanted to see Shiu again. The climax of his realization leading to this beautiful drawing of him playing the piano under the ocean unknowingly to an audience of mermaids. And so Toshihide rekindles his bond with Shiu, gets some action, and the melodies continue to resonate. Siren Rhapsody, by its bare-bones structures and plot, is nothing special. That doesn't mean it's not enjoyable, but it doesn't really present anything new or innovative. However, what it does do is it conveys the idea of loving someone despite their monstrous qualities, which is an idea I think, or at least I hope, will play a substantial role in regards to Denji and Nayuta's relationship in Chainsaw Man Part 2. Now, I don't want to go too extensively into this as to save my thoughts for Nayuta of the Prophecy, but the way I see it, Siren Rhapsody and its one-shot contemporaries act as blueprints, whether intended or not, for the general ideas and stories Fujimoto most wants to convey. Nayuta is a ball of innocence, but on the same end, she's the reincarnation of the Control Devil, the same being who formerly brought about tragedy and stripped Denji of his found family. And so, depending on her upbringing, Nayuta could end up becoming Denji's greatest source of hope or his greatest fear. Maybe even a mixture of both. All we can do now is speculate, but given Fujimoto's past works, I do think he'll in some manner incorporate ideas surrounding love, relationships, hope, and despair into his narrative. When I Woke Up, I Had Become a Girl Disease is about a dude who one day woke up and became a girl. His name is also the same exact name as the MC from Siren Rhapsody, but Fujimoto's lack of creativity aside, this is a story surrounding identity. Toshihide has lived all his life, mind, and body as a man, but when he turns into a girl, his entire world crashes. He starts getting bullied, becomes victim to vulgar comments, and feels sensations he's never felt before, to the point where his relationship with Rie, his girlfriend, comes at stake. As Toshihide explains, when he was subject to bullying and when Akira saved him, he saw him the same way a girl would. Rie, unable to process that information and overcome with a rush of emotions, tries to have sex as a means to connect, but Toshi rejects her, using his lack of PP energy as his reason. Afterwards, she runs away, tears in her eyes, and Toshi is left at a crossroads. Who are you, man or woman? And faced with this question, Toshihide chooses to be true to himself, who he's always been. Regardless of what his physical body makes him out to be, he affirms to Akira as well as to himself that he's still a man, going on to then support Rie, who he wholeheartedly loved. I think this story is really cute. It's a short, sweet, and emotional journey of a boy who struggles with identity, and for the most part, it conveys its message pretty damn well. That despite everything, you are who you are. Sure, there may be people who find you unappealing or make false judgments of your character, but in the end, you're still you. Toshihide was and still is a man, and his irreversible disease doesn't change that fact. Life moves on, his relationship with Rie stands strong, and those who cherish him continue to do so. But most importantly, by accepting himself, Toshihide is able to find happiness. There's a beauty in how Fujimoto handles characters. His writing is oftentimes subtle and masked underneath all the flair, but once you look past the surface level elements, you realize how much depth and care Fujimoto puts into his works. Obviously, he falls short at times, and he isn't perfect by any means, but when things click, they click. Characters don't feel limited or bound by some imaginary rule or expectation. They're instead fluid, changeable depending on whatever their intended effect may be. In this case, Fujimoto handles it in such a way where you can experience struggle, companionship, and growth all in a small collection of pages. There are no long-winded monologues of Toshi explaining how he feels, nor are there any elaborate insights into his psyche. Instead, we get precise, calculative moments of realization and introspection, moments that do very well in getting the message across. Now, would we have been better off with a more detailed exploration of the ideas tackled? Yeah, probably, but in the confines of a one-shot, Fujimoto does an incredible job at delivering, and that praise is one I hold for all of his works. Nayuta is the girl of prophecy, and Kenji is her older brother. As the tale goes, one day a magic user with horns that pierces the womb will be born. This person will speak in a cryptic language and be void of a human heart. They won't be able to feel emotion, but most importantly, they're destined to destroy the world. Hearing this, people at large protest, exclaiming their desires to kill her off. But Kenji's father, upon her birth, teaches him a lifelong lesson, that regardless of what others think or say, or what the prophecy entails, Nayuta is family, and family look out for each other. But right after, his father gets murdered by prophecy cultists. And it's here when Kenji learns about the reality of his situation. He loves his sister, but his sister is and potentially can be the cause of great pain. There's this aura of uncertainty and hesitation, but in the end, Kenji stays true to his values, to stand by Nayuta's side no matter the consequence or obstacle. That by itself is something I connect with. I've always been fond of themes related to family, and seeing Kenji's resolve to protect hits home. Kenji's choice dooms his future. His relationships are hindered, his job is lost, and his reputation is destroyed. This is the boy nurturing the devil's child, and by extension, the boy who's fated the world to end. Sure, there's always the possibility of the prophecy being false, but because it's so ambiguous, fear takes hold. Nayuta seems docile, but she very well could bring about tragedy, which Fujimoto fully feeds into by portraying her as an unknown. She's abnormal, hard to understand, and everything she does is alarming. There's a very real sense of danger that comes from her mere existence. But despite all of that, she's still Kenji's sister, and the love he holds for her emanates from every action he takes and every word he says. Yes, there's an element of doubt, but in each instance, again and again, he affirms to Nayuta that they're family, and more than anything, he just wants her to be alive. There's a beauty in that. Nayuta is the reason Kenji lost both of his parents, but Kenji doesn't hold any resentment for it and instead tries his best to support her. He has an earnest desire to make sure she's okay, and I find that incredibly heartwarming. On the opposite end, Nayuta may not be all too expressive, but you can tell from how she views Kenji, she does deep down worry for him. Her methods are wrong and the way she views the world might be different, but when push comes to shove, she wants the best for Kenji just as much Kenji wants the best for her. At its core, it's a really complicated but genuine relationship between two people struggling to communicate, giving their all nonetheless. Nayuta kills livestock for whatever reason. It's a pretty unsettling characteristic, and eventually this characteristic forces Kenji to take the blame to cover her mistakes, leading him ending up torn and bruised. Nayuta, catching on as to who the perpetrators were, goes to take revenge. And by revenge, I mean she straight up conjures up an apocalyptic scenario by making swords fall from the skies. But soon after, Kenji appears and smacks her into sense. The entire page being dedicated to this one interaction, an exchange highlighted because it mattered. Obviously, killing people is bad, and that's why Kenji does what he does, but it's more so the sentiment behind his action that gives it weight. This is the first time Nayuta is scolded, meaning it's also the first time Kenji puts up proper boundaries. Instead of telling her something is wrong, he makes it clear it's wrong. And as a result, their bond deepens. They understand each other just a little bit more. These are the moments I love most out of Fujimoto's works, when he tackles human emotions where sometimes even the most normal of normal interactions make for the most impactful of impactful moments. Nayuta, like any other girl, cries after being scolded for the first time, but her crying is oddly enough endearing because this character who seems so hollow is proven to be not. She's shown to be a person with her own individuality and not a monster. The final scene perfectly bringing it all home, with Nayuta asking the simple question, "Am I scary?" And Kenji responds, "No," because she's his cute little sister. If this ends up being Denji and Nayuta's relationship in Chainsaw Man Part 2, then I'm all for it. In fact, I'd actually be pretty interested in seeing them just live day to day and slowly build a connection. I think that'd be a cool way to contrast the chaotic and insane nature of Part 1 with something more grounded. It'd also be a means to explore Denji's character and approach to life after growing as a person. But even if this isn't the approach Fujimoto takes, this one-shot at the very least lays down the bare bones foundation. Now, similar to how Nayuta of the Prophecy acts as pre-Chainsaw Man Part 2, Imouto no An is straight up Look Back 0.0. It deals with a lot of the same ideas, and certain story beats are essentially the same. I'd even go as far as calling it a prototype for what was to come. But that isn't to say Imouto no An doesn't have its own identity, cause it does. The scene opens up to a drawing of Mitsuki in the nude, leaving Mitsuki herself contemplating life as she's blasted with a wave of embarrassment. The person who drew this painting is her sister, and right now, Mitsuki is living her worst nightmare. But soon enough, you realize Mitsuki's real insecurity doesn't stem from humiliation, but from her inferiority complex. Kyoko has always stuck to Mitsuki like glue, and Mitsuki has always played the role of the eldest. While Kyoko aspired to be like her sister, Mitsuki paved the path to follow. But as they grew older, something became evident. Kyoko was talented. She had a greater potential for growth and very quickly realized it, and in doing so left Mitsuki behind. Now unable to act as a role model, Mitsuki felt lesser. She was surpassed. And with that foundation, the similarities between Imouto no An and Look Back start to show themselves. Both deal with feelings of inadequacy and talent versus hard work. Art is Mitsuki's passion, and similarly, drawing is Fujino's passion. But that's exactly why when they put their all into it just to come short, they're crushed. After all, seeing something they care for so much fail is demoralizing. Sure, passions are driven by passion, but when the time and effort you put in amounts to nothing, it hurts. And it's that struggle that adds an emotional weight to these characters and their character journeys. Both Mitsuki and Fujino go through heavy internal battles, and their respective arcs surround overcoming them. In Mitsuki's case, she lacks confidence, or rather, her confidence slowly deteriorates as jealousy and spite takes hold, which only grows stronger as Kyoko's skills improve. Eventually, their relationship becomes torn and the two sisters stop talking. But after looking at her nude drawing with a clear conscience, and after seeing Kyoko for who she truly was, a fire awakens. This picture, awarded the title of best, was actually created from a place of genuine love. It was created by Kyoko, who wanted to capture her greatest inspiration, the person she looked up to most, the one she loved above all. Sure, the drawing might have been perverted and or distasteful, but the reason there was so much care and detail put in was because Kyoko wanted to do justice to the person she held in the highest regard. She wanted to make Mitsuki, who shined ever so brightly in her eyes, as beautiful as she could. And through a brief exchange, Mitsuki realizes that. What follows is an enchanting sequence of page-turners displaying her passions reinvigorated. It's her drawing once again with full intent to make the best piece she could. No matter how long it took, talent or not, Mitsuki loved to draw, and deep down, also loved her sister. So as any older sibling would, she set out to take the crown, and her efforts paid off. Her skills were recognized, and her relationship with Kyoko was born anew. I haven't mentioned this till now, but another aspect Fujimoto excels at is his ability to show don't tell, and more specifically, how he does so through paneling. It's not as evident here as with his later works, but Fujimoto excels at conveying emotion through pure imagery. For example, as Mitsuki mesmerizingly stares at Kyoko's drawing, you feel the same sense of awe as she does as the lights take over and we get a close-up of Mitsuki's deep immersion. Likewise, when Mitsuki regains her spirit, there's two panels conveying a brief pause, followed by page after page after page of her drawing, which goes to perfectly sell the turning point of the story, when our main character had matured. There's this passage of time, and within that time is Mitsuki's dream brought to life. Manga is storytelling told with imagery, meaning unlike animation, it's segmented. Your mind has to fill in the blanks, but in the hands of a skilled artist, scenes will flow seamlessly from one place to the next, which is exactly the case with Fujimoto. It's his attention to detail and grasp of paneling that allows his stories to feel alive, a living, breathing world with living, breathing characters. And on the same notes, it's also his handling of dialogue that gives his stories that extra push. Fujimoto's dialogue in its simplest form feels real. It's almost never boring or extraneous, but instead concise and meaningful. Kyoko loves her sister, and you can feel that through small instances of endearment whenever she's in Mitsuki's presence. The same applies to Mitsuki. While not as explicit, the desire to become someone worth looking up to shows Mitsuki's desire to grow as an artist and as a person for both her own and Kyoko's sake. But with Look Back, everything I've just described is taken to even greater heights, more so than anyone could have ever predicted. It's a story with a heart-wrenching emotional heart and an immensely inspiring message, to persevere despite everything. A message that applies to not just your hopes and dreams, but also to life itself. Fujino is a character I think a lot of people resonate with because of how relatable her struggle is and how well it's conveyed. Through the repetition of panels and pages, we get to really see just how much effort Fujino puts in and how much more she cares. Even at the expense of personal relationships, her passion comes first. Time rapidly moves forward, but for Fujino, the same scene, the same image, day after day after day plays on. This is the reality of being an artist, of pursuing your dreams. Improvement doesn't come by easy. It takes real dedication and commitments. It takes discipline to stick through the bad and the good, success and defeat. There's no correct path to follow, nor is there any guarantee if your path will pay off. And in Fujino's case, it initially doesn't, destroying her morale. But much like Imouto Naan, after realizing that despite her flaws, Fujino was still able to reach someone to inspire a spark within her, lights anew, leading to this beautiful and cathartic spread of her dancing in the rain filled with joy. It's a scene that has genuine weight behind it because we spend countless pages experiencing her struggle. We go through failure and her feelings of incompetence, but just as she's on the brink of quitting, she's acknowledged. And that exchange is all it takes. I can't express how much I love this sequence of events. It's something that's better felt than explained, but still I'll try my best. Kyomoto embodies a pure, unadulterated soul. She loves arts, and that earnest passion is depicted through every facet of her character. From her small stutters, to her appearance, to her fangirling, to her simple genuineness, you can tell this is someone who loves what she does. So when Fujino encounters such a person, that passion bleeds onto her. Passionate people bring out the passion in others after all, which is then followed up with a 3-page panel progression depicting Fujino's happiness from being recognized for the first time. Prior to this moment, Fujino was defeated. She had already given up after spending years honing her craft with little to no payoff. But through Kyomoto, when she saw that there was a payoff, that her sacrifices meant something, she couldn't help but burst out in excitement. The climax to her joy culminating into this one spread. And just like that, a new journey begins with the two working towards their dreams. But Look Back doesn't end there. This is a story about passion just as much as it's a story about overcoming grief, and more specifically, overcoming the loss of a lifelong friend. Kyomoto dies in a gruesome fashion. She gets axed to death. We aren't shown the contents in graphic detail, but the implication by itself is heartbreaking. This was a girl who had a full future ahead of her, someone who was in the process of finding themselves and becoming the person they truly wanted to be. But that potential was tragically stripped away. The same girl who reignited the fire within Fujino's heart and gave her that extra push to pick up the pen once again was now gone. Without ever even getting the chance to say goodbye, Fujino is then left shattered. But it's the resolution to her inner turmoil that gives Look Back its staying power. As a means to mourn, Fujino visits Kyomoto's house and breaks down almost immediately. She blames herself and berates drawing as a whole. After all, it was the reason they met in the first place, the reason Kyomoto died. And so Fujino conjures up a make-believe fantasy of them never meeting and of her giving up drawing for good. But most importantly, one where Kyomoto was still alive. However, fantasy, no matter how bright and desirable it may be, is still fantasy. It's not the life you're living now. Which means Fujino, whether she wants to or not, has to come to terms with Kyomoto's death. She has to eventually move forward because time moves on. And how she does so is through the exact same thing she berated just moments ago. A manga strip depicting the same scenario in which Kyomoto was saved. It's the strip that gives Fujino her second wind. And we as readers feel that. We see the light shine through. We see Fujino recollecting her past. We see her cry her heart out one last time, and we see her stand tall, ready to face tomorrow. In the end, even in that make-believe fantasy, the desire to draw never truly went away. Kyomoto still went to art school, and Fujino still held on to her childhood dream. And just like reality, the second she was acknowledged, something in her just clicked. Sure, in this moment, Fujino could hate herself, and she very well does. But drawing, despite all the tediousness it entailed, was a passion that brought her true happiness like no other. So much so that she couldn't properly put those feelings into words. It was a simple act of sharing stories, but that connection, that ability to reach another person's heart, was something Fujino cherished. And that's all it really comes down to. Life can kick you down real hard. But there's a difference between letting the bad keep you down and using the good to keep you strong. To not look back in anger, but to carry on the wishes of those who have passed and to move forward. This one-shot is obviously very personal to Fujimoto. The fact that Fujino and Kyomoto's names combined literally spell out his name is very telling of that. And I think because it's so personal, the story has this intrinsic allure that a lot of people find themselves in. Being insecure of your talents and struggling with confidence is a struggle everyone experiences at some point. Whether it be following your dreams or following a stable career, there's no real wrong answer. And honestly, it depends entirely on what you, on an individual level, make out of the life you're given. Likewise, everyone at some point experiences death and deals with it differently. But how Look Back tackles both elements and the overall message it conveys is one worth remembering, with the final panel being the same thing we'd already become so acclimated to. The same image of Fujino drawing. Goodbye Eri, in my eyes, is the perfect story. From start to finish, it's immersive, innovative, touching, inspirational, and much, much more. From the strip-like paneling, to the subtle changes in expression, to the scene-by-scene shot composition, Goodbye Eri quite literally is a movie in manga form. The story flows, panels transition effortlessly from one to the next, emotion is felt without the need for long-winded speeches, and readers are left continuously guessing as their heartstrings are pulled all the while. It centers around a boy named Yuta, tasked to film his mother's passing. She's been diagnosed with a fatal disease, and now her only option is to count down her days. Thus, Yuta, as a means to capture her legacy, shoots his camera. Right off the bat, there's a sense of urgency. With every page turn, you get closer to his mother's death. You know what's coming, it's inevitable. Her illness continues to get worse, and dread slowly consumes her and her family. Despite the joyous and optimistic aura everyone exudes, deep down, they're fighting internal battles. They don't want to say goodbye. Through quirky interactions, although strange, this family starts feeling like a family. They're given personality, yet behind their eccentric exterior lies a darkness eating away at itself. Shots of Yuta's father crying scatter the pages as the day draws near, until eventually, it does. Yuta keeps his head low, hesitant and scared. An increase in blurs emerge as panic sets in, and with each passing second, the distance between him and his mother's deathbed grows ever so larger, building towards a climactic finale of a boy running away from his problems, his fears, a moment of weakness due to his unwillingness, or rather, his inability to accept his mother's death, just for the very next scene to be a fucking explosion. Not exactly how you'd think things would play out. So I ask, why? Why did this film that was supposedly a tearjerker surrounding death and tragedy end in such a manner? What was the point? From a storytelling perspective, what did this scene do aside from providing pure shock value? Well, in this singular moment, that's all it is. An explosive finish filled with superficiality. But when you see it in context, in retrospect, you realize this scene is as big a twist as it is set up for every story and emotional beat coming forward. By extension, it's also Fujimoto's choice and approach to paneling that makes moments like these as immersive and hard-hitting as they are. For the most part, the paneling in this one-shot is one-dimensional, but this linearity works extremely well in regards to the type of story Fujimoto wants to tell. Everything is shown through the lens of Yuta's camera, and Fujimoto's drawings encapsulate that. It's because the story is portrayed in such a manner that it feels like watching a film through the very lens Yuta records the world with. You'll notice how certain scenes are essentially copy-pasted, but changed ever so slightly to convey a gradual progression. Deviations are very minimal, but through slight changes, movement is invoked. The story feels alive. Naturally, after Yuta's movie is screened, people are left bewildered and disgusted, so Yuta, hurt from being ridiculed, decides to go next. But right before jumping, he meets Eri. From there, we're given a play-by-play of these two traversing different settings, and through them, we get to explore the world just as they do. Skip forward to a little bit later, and a similar effect is reached, except this time, instead of a change in setting, it's a change in character relations. We get to see how the two interact, and over time, how a real, genuine bond is formed. Through inside jokes, routine movie screenings, and simply being in each other's company, their relationship strengthens, and likewise, so does our investment. Eri loved Yuta's first film, and her dream is to see him create another, which later culminates into a blend of Yuta's personal experience with a pinch of fantasy. Here, the real Yuta seeps through. In the past, Yuta was afraid, scared, frightened of losing his mother. It was a daunting pressure of knowing death was just around the corner and nothing could prevent it. So he ran, both in real life and in the film he created. But in his new film, he'd face his fears, conquer his doubts, and come to terms with his grief. At least, that was the plan. But life doesn't exactly play out the way you always intend. Sometimes the unexpected happens, and as people, all we can do is deal with it. In the same way Yuta's mother fell ill, Eri also endured a similar sickness. Meaning again, Yuta would be forced to relive his trauma, his hardship, his loss, and again, he'd be powerless to change anything. I feel for the kid. I felt for him when his mother passed, I felt for him when he expressed his regrets, and now more than ever, I feel for him when Eri falls. Eri was the reason Yuta gave life another chance, but having to watch that very friend die before his own eyes is cruel. So how does he bring himself to willingly do so? Through a lie. Truth is, Yuta's mother wasn't all that. Up until her final moments, she became obsessed, disillusioned, and in the process degraded her own son. This was Fujimoto's twist, the blurring of fiction and reality. By playing upon readers' expectations and telling goodbye Eri through Yuta's camera, Fujimoto fabricated a false image of Yuta's mother. He led us to believe her to be a good person when in actuality, she was a tormented, lost, and hateful individual who on her last legs wasn't anywhere near close to the ideal Yuta had portrayed her as. Yuta's first movie only displayed a fraction of who his mother truly was, but not her whole self. It showed the good without the bad. But what's so beautiful is it memorialized her in a way where all those who'd watch his film would only know her as a kind, caring, and sympathetic person. Yes, his mother's ideal was just an ideal, but in the end, what mattered most was the memories his film captured and the loving relationship his family held. This moment is impactful not only because it recontextualizes prior events, but because it perfectly conveys the power of storytelling. Fujimoto literally lies to us, the readers, and through it directly conveys the emotions, feelings, twists, and turns stories, and in this case, movies can invoke. So with Eri, it's a matter of repetition. Yuta has the power to remember people however he pleases, and this time, he's resolved to stick through till the end. Eri wore glasses, she had dental retainers, she was a bitch at times and only had 2 friends. None of which is actually revealed to the audience. But what is shown is scenes of her smiling, enjoying life, going out, goofing around, and overall, just trying to make the most of her last moments. It's possible that during this time, she was depressed and her feelings of fulfillment and joy were relics of the past, but her memories would continue to live on forever. Because through this film, a positive, everlasting influence would be left behind. A movie that would make everyone bawl their eyes out. Pause. Fujimoto is insane. He's got a real creative mind, and every piece of his showcases his ability to conjure up chaotic and captivating storylines. But what I've noticed is throughout almost all of them, despite death, dread, and tragedy being so heavily prevalent, Fujimoto always returns to where what I think his real interests lie: love, hope, and humanity. Agni loses his entire village to a ruthless, indiscriminate massacre. Constantly, he's subjected to torturous ordeals, and the very meaning of his existence, of him living, is questioned. Pain and suffering is all he knows, and rage is the only drive keeping him going. But at the end of his journey, through the support of those who truly cared, the final lesson Agni learns is to live for himself. Likewise, Denji starts off as a lost, naive child whose understanding of relationships is foreign, with the exception of Pochita. As such, he struggles to sympathize and questions his own humanity, but through experiencing various forms of love, Denji learns to cherish others, and over time matures. But just as quickly, the lives so precious and dear to him are stripped away. And yet, despite the soul-crushing reality at his doorsteps, this did not mean that Denji had lost, because his trauma was in fact beatable. Life is full of highs and lows, light and dark. People stumble a hell of a lot, but in order to rise, you have to fall. You have to accept both the good and the bad. Both in Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man, despair engulfed Agni and Denji's worlds in black. But no matter how small, dim, or faint the light shined, hope still persisted. In the final fight, Denji wins not because of his physical strength, but because of his willingness to grow. He wins through learning to value himself, his feelings, and wants just a little bit more. I think this is where Fujimoto's heart lies. He wants to tell engaging stories which at their core revolve around people, the emotions they undergo, the struggles they face, and the bonds they form. And that, of course, applies to Goodbye Eri. Years into the future, Yuta loses everyone he loves to a car crash. Prior to the scene, Fujimoto dedicates 4 blank pages in order to set a tonal shift. An effect very similar to what you'd experience during a scene change or intermission in an actual movie. With time comes change, and with change comes pain. Unable to handle the loss, Yuta decides to off himself, and Fujimoto then takes us on a nostalgic journey of the same traversal of settings from when Yuta first encountered Eri and gave life another chance. A callback to that chance meeting that saved him. But now, Yuta has given up. In a perfect world, your protagonist is supposed to overcome all hurdles, and those hurdles are supposed to be the building blocks to his or her character. But unfortunately, the ideals preached in fiction don't always translate to real life. Losing someone you love is hard. Real fucking hard. So when I see Yuta lose not 1 or 2, but everyone he has ever cared for, I can't blame him when he can't find a reason to cling on. But for me, that sense of defeat, being unable to persevere, makes this story more intimate, more genuine. Not everyone has the tools nor the strength to carry on, but still, in one way or another, we all try. But unfortunately, Yuta no longer has the will in him. That is, until he meets Eri, just not the one he once knew. Apparently, Eri's a vampire, and every 200 or so years, her brain reaches its maximum capacity and she dies. Afterwards, a new Eri is born and the despairing cycle repeats. Dazed with the shocking revelation, Yuta then asks the question, will you be able to cope with this? With a single movie displaying her previous self. Despite knowing that she'd be doomed to see everyone she ever loves or ever comes to love die before her, would she be able to stay sane? To not be driven to despair? And Eri responds, yes, because this one singular movie would immortalize Yuta and Eri far, far beyond their deaths. And again, no matter how much time passed, she'd always be able to return and remember the people they were. That is beautiful. What follows is acceptance. Yuta calmly says goodbye, letting go of his past and the burdens he carried. He sees Eri for one last time, signifying growth, and comes to a realization. Yuta's movie was always missing something, a pinch of fantasy. After all, Eri really was a vampire, and once that's taken away, we're left with a cliche film ending of a love interest's death. So Yuta, in the most perfect and grandiose way possible, finds a solution by ending his movie with a bang. Thank you for watching. This video is long overdue, but I really hope you guys enjoyed. Consider subscribing, commenting, liking, all that good stuff. But I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Peace.